So it's the end of the year, and you know what that means. It's time for the most prestigious awards handed out to game after game in honor of their various achievements throughout the year. In some places by some people, but certainly not by me. You see, everyone goes for doing the biggest, most bombastic awards for all the great games that came out this year. But I figure, something that no one's trying to do is making the Laziest awards. So, yeah, I'm gonna shoot for that. So here it is, the Laziest and somewhat Arbitrary awards for games that happened to come out in 2021. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We're gonna do that instead. I think I like that more. So I've got three basic categories here. I don't really go looking for bad games. I would love to say that we're gonna talk about the best and worst games of the year, but honestly, we're gonna talk about the best and meh-iest games of the year. And we're also going to talk about games I should have played but didn't. But I'm going to make excuses as to why I didn't. And I think I have good excuses for not playing these games which were popular and people probably gave awards to somewhere. I don't really know. So we're going to start with the least meh-iest award of 2021. Good job. Good job, Deathloop. Yeah, Deathloop is the least meh-iest of the meh-iest games of 2021. I was really hoping that maybe after Prey, Deathloop would end up being a bit better of a showing from Arcane, because I really, really liked Prey. I think Prey is one of my favorite immersive sims of all time. But then, and I didn't really care that much for the Dishonored games. They're alright. I think Dishonored 2 is pretty good. Dishonored 1... My point being that I don't think Arcane has really ever been that strong at making these types of games, but here we are with Deathloop, and yeah, it's very okay. A lot of the immersive sim elements are pretty toned down in favor of more action-oriented combat. There's a lot of pointless systems in it that I don't really care all that much for. Like, you have a lot of upgrades that don't really matter and aren't really necessary. A stealth system that feels kind of tacked on and insubstantial. Like, it just doesn't really feel like it's all that necessary to solve any of the problems, because you can basically just shoot your way through most of the levels. You're so incredibly powerful, even without a tremendous number of upgrades, by just finding some of the game's more decent guns, which aren't that hard to find. You can just kind of kill everyone, and honestly, since you're going through the same levels over and over and over again, I really feel that you end up being pretty incentivized to shoot your way through most of the time, because you're probably not gonna have have the patience to sneak through a level once, right? But then when you're doing it for the third or fourth or fifth time, you just don't care anymore, and it's a lot of the time loop shenanigans as well too start to have this effect on the player, where it's like, I could sneak my way through, I could do it perfectly, or whatever, I could just kill everyone. They're just gonna come back tomorrow anyways. What's the difference? And I do think that maybe unintentionally conveys the feeling of being in the death loop, but I'm not sure that's ultimately good or what you really want necessarily. I think that it does come at the cost, giving you that feeling does ultimately come at the cost of somewhat compromising the actual gameplay and making it feel tedious and repetitive, as it would no doubt be when you're literally living the same day over and over and over and over again. I do love the idea of setting up this intricate web of assassinations that you have to do in order to ultimately solve the game's big puzzle. I think that feels really great, and it is why it's at the least meh-y game of 2021. And maybe I'll talk more about this game in depth at some point, but I don't think so. It's just not that interesting. I think I've basically covered everything I would like to say about it here. The story is bland. The characters are not very interesting, and I think the game is at its best when it's exploring its systems in a way that uses the death loop to its advantage, but it's not really doing that, I think, a fair amount of the time. So, yeah, Deathloop wins best time looping game of 2021. Actually, no, it doesn't win that. I take that back. I take that award back and give that to Loop Hero. I don't plan to talk about Loop Hero because it's not that interesting either. I found that also kind of a frustrating game, but it's still a better time loop game than Deathloop, so I have to give some award to Deathloop. It gets the best repeatedly kicking people off of ledges game in 2020. Is that even true? Yeah, sure, it can have that. The best kicking people off ledges award for 2021. It gets that. Good job, Deathloop. So, yeah, now let's talk about one of the best games of the year, Walkabout Mini Golf. I already made a video on this. It's a spectacular VR golfing game that's a lot more than a spectacular VR golfing game. It's a fantastic sort of way to explore digital installations without having to leave your home. It's a really fantastic walkabout. It is what it says on the label. It's a great time. I would really recommend it if you have any VR headset. It's a very chill, relaxed experience. And I was recently playing some of Let's Golf, which has recently added some VR functionality. And boy, does Walkabout just shit all over that. It just makes it look like garbage by comparison. And Let's Golf has some advantages, the most obvious being that it essentially has an infinite number of courses because it has an editor that's really easy to use, and there's a lot of really great online courses available for it. But that does come at the cost of the golf being not nearly as good, like in order of magnitudes less interesting. And a lot of the custom courses just aren't that well put together, quite honestly. And playing more Walkabout Mini Golf, it really does just strike me how well put together the courses are, how they encourage you to, make these interesting skill shots and test yourself. And even the easier courses will often have alternate routes that with some more tricky ways to find your way through them to really get super far under par. And it just feels so great. Like even something as small as the size of the cup you have to shoot the ball into, it's an appropriate size in Walkabout Mini Golf, whereas in Let's Golf it's like just enormous. It's just massive. Like you couldn't miss it if you tried in a lot of cases. And that's to make up for, the sort of wonkiness you get by playing it on a pancake, right? It's because you don't have the control that VR affords you. But in Walkabout, you do. You do in Walkabout have tremendous control over how and where you're gonna, putt to. So it just works a lot better. It's excellent. It's amazing. The levels that they've added for free and as DLC have only gotten better over time, and I love it. It's the best. It wins what I gave it before. It's the best VR game of 2021. Not that there is a tremendous amount of competition there. There weren't that many VR games to come out this year. I'm going to talk about another VR game in the best games of 2021 because I think there was another really great VR game to come out in 2021, but it has some flaws and foibles that I think prevents it from getting the best VR game of 2021. So that's what Walkabout gets. It's great. It's great. Far Cry 6, I didn't play it. I have a good excuse for this one. It's Far Cry 6. It's the 6th Far Cry game. Far Cry games have been the same since Far Cry, well, really since 2, honestly. And 3, in my opinion, was just a worse Far Cry 2, except in maybe a narrative sense. And then Far Cry 4 was a much prettier Far Cry 3, but probably still worse than Far Cry 3. And then Far Cry 5 was worse than Far Cry 4. And here we are with Far Cry 6, which is more Far Cry. Like, what do you want? Do you want me to play this? I don't want to play it. I don't. I don't want to. Like, I look at it, and it's more copy and pasted bases for you to go do stuff in and shoot guys with pretty generic weapons. Who's playing these at this point? Who? Like, honestly. why is this still a franchise? I feel oftentimes by the time that especially a game series hits like the 5th or 6th installment, they're kind of just like running on autopilot at that point anyways. You know, you could look back at almost anything that hits that number, Resident Evil, Soul Calibur, whatever, you know. They're not trying anymore at that point. Well, maybe Resident Evil was trying, but it was trying weird things. That's really neither here nor there. This is a series desperately in need of some kind of a significant overhaul. We'll see if it gets it. Honestly, Ubisoft seems very content to make basically the same game repeatedly, and I'm not even talking about Far Cry. All of their games are basically the same game repeated ad nauseum at this point, so yeah, whatever. Except Siege. Rainbow Six Siege is great. That's technically a Ubisoft game. Don't know how that happened. Must have been an accident. They just like copy and pasted something from another project that someone else was working on, maybe. I don't know. Anyways, Far Cry 6, it's the most the dude who plays Gus Fring. It's the most Gus Fring-y game of 2021. Yeah. The World Ends With You, Neo. Here we are back on the most meh games of 2021. The World Ends With You, Neo. It's not very good. It's not the worst either, but it's not very good. The World Ends With You is a really interesting game. The first one I'm talking about, of course, because it just can't exist outside of the DS. Like, even if you were to play The World Ends With You on an emulator, you probably wouldn't still be getting the full experience of what it is to play The World Ends With You. It's something that you really have to just go bust out a real-ass physical DS or 3DS to go play it on, because you're just not gonna get the same game anywhere else. And I mean, they've released it on phones and non-touchscreen platforms, I think, at this point. Maybe, honestly, I don't know about that. Maybe they haven't. I would have to think about that for a second. But I don't care. It's not worth that much consideration. My point mostly being that it's a game that was a product of and for its time. And really outside of that, you're just not... You can't recreate it. You can't make The World Ends With You sequel. But here we are, having made a The World Ends With You sequel. You know, it's an impossible task. They did it anyways, and what we got, or what we have here, is just it's imagine the first game, but without the dual screen gimmick, which is a tremendous amount of the fun, and without a lot of the sort of, you know, I don't want to say like innocence of the era, but without a lot of the how would I put it? With a tremendous more amount of established anime game tropes, I think, essentially. And The World Ends With You, Neo occasionally attempts to subvert those, but really it kind of just falls into being an anime game, which is just sort of a genre. At this point, there are just anime games, and it's kind of just another one of those with a lot of the same established tropes. And I feel like The World Ends With You probably played upon a lot of the similar tropes at the time, but they were less well established, less well used, to such a degree that I can't stand to look at them anymore. And, you know, I was like a teenager when that game came out, so obviously it appealed a lot more to me at the time. And, you know, I look at The World Ends With You, Neo, and even before it came out, I had this question in my brain of like, I liked The World Ends With You when it came out because I was a teenager, probably kind of angsty, probably basically perfectly in the target demographic for that game. But who is the target demographic for a sequel to that game? Because all the people like me who were teenagers when that game came out aren't anymore. I'm fucking 30 now. Like, who is this for? Because I doubt very many people who aren't interested in The World Ends With You are going to pick up The World Ends With You Neo and go, wow, I really want to play that. I sincerely doubt it. And a lot of people who played the original game just probably aren't going to resonate with the themes that were in The World Ends With You nearly as much. So I just don't understand who this is for. And yeah, the gameplay it's you bend your fingers around a lot on the screen to try and press as many different pins as possible at the same amount of time. So each one is activated by a different button press or whatever, and it does a different type of attack. A lot of the attacks are kind of copy and pasted between one pin or another with slightly different effects. So it feels pretty repetitive. It's also a great way to get carpal tunnel because a lot of them require you to repeatedly mash the same button over and over again. And the story is slower than molasses going uphill in January. It just doesn't ever get anywhere. I'll fully admit I didn't finish this game, but that's because I got, like, I don't even remember how far in, like 12 or 20 hours in, and there still basically wasn't a plot. Like, nothing had happened. Nothing. Like, you're in the same death game from the first one again for some reason, even though, like, you ended it in the first one. And you're there again, and that's like the plot for a good 20 hours, and I kind of understand the metaphors that they're going for and how people are competing with each other even though they should be working together to overcome the game masters, and there's actually really nothing preventing the players from all just working together in this one, which makes it really baffling to me, because, like, why then wouldn't you? Why wouldn't? Because the setup is such that everyone is corralled into teams, but there's no incentive from a technical perspective in the game for people to just play on one team. Like, if you just played on one team, you would all win. But the game doesn't really address that. It kind of just assumes that people split off into tribes and things, because I guess metaphors and shit. It's not very well written. It's just not good. It's just not very good. And yeah, I also, one other thing I really don't like about it is how it kind of destroys the first game's ending in order to make itself for some reason. Small spoilers for the end of the first game, but in the remake, or not even remake, release, whatever, that they made for the Switch before this game came out, in the end of the extra story after the first game that's in the Switch version of The World Ends With You, they kill off Neko and, create some sort of doomsday prophecy thing, saying that the world's gonna end. And it really just sours the ending of the first game for no particular reason, in my opinion. Like, why would you need to kind of defraud the ending of the first game to make a second one? I think that also speaks to how complete of a story The World Ends With You is. It completely wraps up everything in it. There's no need for a sequel. There are no character arcs that really go unresolved. There's no plot lines, no real questions left dangling after the first one. Well, maybe one or two, right? But there's just no need for The World Ends With You sequel from a mechanical perspective, from a narrative perspective. It just doesn't need to exist. It probably shouldn't have existed. I think now that we've got it, I can say that fairly definitively. I might go back and finish this game eventually, but boy, is it bad. It's, like I said, I wouldn't put bad games here because they're kind of meh. And it does do some things right, which is why it is sort of more meh than bad. But this just shouldn't have existed, I think, at the end of the day. So that's what I'm going to give it. The game that most shouldn't have existed in 2021 is The World Ends With You. And it actually has some steep competition with our next Laziest game, but it definitely wins out. It definitely wins out. Disco Elysium. Yeah, no, I know this didn't technically come out this year, but a big update to it did, and I played it for the first time this year, so it's here. And it is spectacular, honestly. For a game that is riding the coattails of, what was the name of the game? Planescape Torment. Yeah, it actually manages to live up to the sort of legacy that game left behind of being this really strongly introspective story about exploring yourself through a character and questioning not only the character that you're playing, but the player about themselves. It's a really fascinating game that has so many interesting and well-written perspectives on various political ideals. And I think one of the reasons that Disco Elysium ended up being so appealing is it does kind of happen in the way that political discourse happens anymore, where it's sort of memey and funny and weird, but also there are serious things and people's lives at stake. It's this sort of weird, darkly comedic look at politics that I think is only too much a mirror of how things really are anymore. And God, I just love so many of its quotes, like, what is it? 0.0001% of socialism has ever been built, but you, Mr. Big Socialism, are gonna make it happen. You're gonna go out there and you're gonna make socialism. Like, I love that so much. And I know I'm paraphrasing a little bit there, but it's such a good, like, delusional perspective of people who I think are beginning to understand various political ideas. And I think that if Disco Elysium really does something well, it's showing why people believe in the various philosophical and political ideas that they do, and really explaining to people who are at various levels of understanding of politics why is socialism, why is fascism, why is Stalinism, why any of these things, I think is really incredibly well articulated by Disco Elysium. Oh, right, and it's also a game about a murder mystery. Yeah, I guess it's also that. Sure. Mm-hmm. It's also there. It's such a wonderful RPG that really prods the player into picking a sort of mindset to go into the game with, and then really interrogating not just the character, but like I said, the player, about whether they really can believe in that philosophy and really whether it does actually stand up to the world that exists in Disco Elysium. And yeah, God, there's just so many branching ways that the narrative can go as well, based off of how you actually build your character numerically and with stats. I had terrible luck and failed almost every conceivable check, even ones that had like 80, 90%. Didn't matter. I rolled snake eyes through that whole goddamn game. It was incredibly both frustrating and interesting to see me fail repeatedly over and over and over again, except when it seemed to matter least, but even those are just absolutely unforgettable moments. I know that some people talk about the scene where you can sing about your past and how interesting it is to fail that, but I also think it's marvelous to succeed it as well and see this just moment of real beauty and human emotion in the midst of chaos and anarchy and hatred and political divisions that are, I would say, unheard of, but in truth I would say probably more on par with the way people actually are today. It's beautiful and terrifying, and I really need to talk more about the game specifically eventually, but God, Disco Elysium is amazing. It's actually just spectacular. And if it had actually come out this year, I probably would say it was actually the best game of this year. So that's probably what I'm going to give it. It's the best game that technically came out this year. The best game that technically came out this year, Disco Elysium. Congratulazzles. Halo Infinite. I guess I probably should have played this, but it was about last year that I actually got a chance to play most of the Halo games in, Halo 3 and 2 and stuff that really hadn't been on PC until the Master Chief Collection came out. And even then, after it came out, I didn't want to pay a lot of money for it, so I waited for it to go on sale or go on the Game Pass or something. I don't even remember. My point is, I found out last year that I really don't like Halo games. Their very surface level science fiction plots are not engaging to me. Like, it's very often just sort of things happening in space with very little interesting justification or complication, or much diving into the ramifications of these various organisms and technologies existing. I kind of feel that, much like Destiny, they sort of wanted to leave a lot of the more interesting things to side stories and novelizations and stuff for some reason, which I don't really understand. But I mean, obviously some people enjoyed the plots of Halo, I guess, maybe. I kind of think it just comes down to big shooty man in space shoots good on enemies bad. And that's exciting. And don't get me wrong, the surface level plots of Halo can be sort of exciting, but they often feel like they lack tangible stakes, or I don't know, like I don't even know what's going on in the Halo games most of the time. I'm going to be entirely honest. They don't really explain well what is happening in Halo games and why I should care about whatever I'm doing at the time. It's mostly kind of just go blow up thing bad, blow it up, good blow up. And a lot of the reason that I didn't care for it is how console first the game design is. You have a lot of weapons with really wide spray patterns or very generous sort of aim correction. Sometimes the higher difficulties could be pretty interesting, I guess. But even then, once you hit Halo 3, the highest difficulty really isn't particularly high. I know I'm not really talking about Halo Infinite, but that's because I haven't played it. And again, this is my excuse why. Like, I just don't think Halo games are all that fun. I don't. And Halo Infinite, with its grapple hook and stuff, certainly looks like probably the best Halo game, I guess. Sure, yeah, why not? But I don't want to play it. And I did play the multiplayer of Halo Infinite for a little while, and I said to myself, why am I playing this instead of Splitgate? And I didn't have a good answer. But I also don't want to play Splitgate. Like, I don't really like that much either, but it's still a lot better than Halo Infinite's multiplayer, in my opinion. Yeah, whatever. I just don't care about Halo. I don't. Yeah, that's me. It's not, I don't care. So Halo Infinite gets the game that had Master Chief in it this year. It is the game with Master Chief in it this year award. Good job, Halo Infinite. You had Master Chief. So I want to, before I go to the most meh-iest game of this year, I want to talk about a game which is probably the most insidious and destructive game I think I've ever played. And that's League of Legends. It's terrible. It makes you into a worse person. A lot of the reason that I haven't done as much work as I should have on any of this lately is because I've been addicted to League. It's like playing a slot machine, League, really, honestly. You pull the lever and you see if you get good teammates. And a lot of times you don't. And then you lose, and then sometimes you do, and then you win. It's very much like gambling, League, and it also has gambling in it with, boxes and loot boxes and stuff, which I don't know if you can buy. I don't really care. I don't, like, whatever, even if it doesn't, it's still, like, League is the worst game. It's the worst game. It's incredibly fun. Like, I love playing it, sort of, in a way that one loves to go to a casino and watch numbers flash up on a screen that told you if you won. It's really fun, but it's also like your brain hurts afterward. I don't really do drugs myself, but I imagine that's the feeling. Like, it feels great when you're doing it, sort of, but then your brain hurts afterward, but you also still want more of it. Yeah, that's League. Don't play League. don't do that to yourself. It's not a good idea to play League, and you shouldn't do it. So League is the best game that I really think you shouldn't play. That's the award it gets. Don't play it. Don't do it. Save yourself. Run, screaming. Oh, Arcane was really good though. But you probably shouldn't watch Arcane because Arcane might make you want to play League of Legends. That's what happened to me. It doesn't have to happen to you. But if you watch Arcane, it probably will. Don't watch Arcane. It's really good. Arcane gets the best series this year that you shouldn't watch because it will make you play League. Specifically, that's the award it gets. So the almost best game of this year is Resident Evil 8. Boy, did I love Resident Evil 8. I will say that I was maybe soured a tiny bit going into it because I expected it to be a bit more serious kind of after Resident Evil 7, because Resident Evil 7, I just love it. It's I don't know if I would go so far as to say Resident Evil 7 was one of my favorite games of all time, but it's pretty damn close. It's really honestly spectacular. It's this perfect mix of camp horror and just absolute, frightening, horrific stuff. It's great. Resident Evil 7 is spectacular, and Resident Evil 8, being a direct sequel to that, it's just amazing. It's so hilarious and terrifying in different parts of the game and at different times. I mean, it has things that are just straight out of a 1960s B movie. I mean, you literally have it. I'm gonna lightly spoiler Resident Evil 8, but I mean, that's kind of inevitable. You literally have cyborg zombies. Cyborg zombies. Like, you could make this perfectly. Just title it like the man-eating cyborg zombies from France. And I can even see the movie poster now with like featuring Propeller King. He's ready to chop. Like, tell me that isn't a movie you want to see, because I want to see that movie, and I did in Resident Evil 8, because, God, it's fantastic. I mean, the atmosphere, it just oozes atmosphere, and then after drenching you in tremendous amounts of creepy ambiance, it throws an 8-foot-tall vampire lady at you, which, I mean, I don't know whether to be afraid or laugh hilariously at almost every turn in Resident Evil 8. And it also happens to feature probably the best legitimate horror that I've seen this year in the dollhouse thing that I remembered the name of earlier, but I don't now. Oh well. Yeah, it's terrifying. Actually legitimately terrifying. And I love it. I love shooting giant, like, 12-foot zombies with magnums, and I love being scared out of my wits by tiny dolls. All of it is, it's the best. It's not the best this year, but it's really damn close. And this kind of camp horror, it's a camp horror masterpiece, honestly. A lot of people, they look at Resident Evil 6, and they talk about how good Resident Evil 6 is from a camp horror perspective. But, I mean, Resident Evil 8 just blows it out of the water by being both better camp and better horror. And mechanically, too, the way that it follows up from Resident Evil 4, it basically just copies and pastes most of the mechanics from Resident Evil 4 with your gun upgrading and your gun replacing. And it lends itself to this somewhat long-form, somewhat more skill-based combat with a lot more gimmicky enemies that have these like highlighted weak points and whatnot that you can exploit, and it's just great. It's just great. And I think a lot of people forget when they look back at Resident Evil 4 how campy it was. I mean, there's like a tiny little dwarf Napoleon man in Resident Evil 4 that laughs at you a lot. Like, do you remember that? Do you remember the tiny Napoleon? He's in that game. It's really weird because that's a pretty ostensibly serious game, sort of, a lot of the time. But it's just so great, Resident Evil 8, because it dials that little bit of campiness that was in something like Resident Evil 4 up to a tremendous extreme without really compromising a lot of the better elements of Resident Evil 4 and 7, like I think that, say, Resident Evil 5 or 6 did. Resident Evil 5 or 6 kind of compromised how good of a story or game they were by becoming a little bit, I think, too campy, or just sort of going off into some odd directions. But Resident Evil 8 doesn't share the failings of those games really at all, and yeah, it's fantastic. What award should it get? The game that is most like Resident Evil 4 that came out this year. That's what it is. It is most like Resident Evil 4. Congratulations, Resident Evil 8. You are Resident Evil 4 times 2. See, it's because 8. Because, yeah, you get it. Metroid Dread. I used to really enjoy Metroid games. I really did. And then I think I played too many of them. And then I also went and played a lot of other games that probably do Metroid about as well as Metroid or better. And then I lost more interest in actual Metroid. Now, don't get me wrong. I remember playing Metroid Fusion when I was a kid on, what was that, on Game Boy Advance, right? I think? Yeah, it was Game Boy Advance. And, yeah, it was great at the time. Really short, I remember that in particular being. And that's a direct sequel to that. I just didn't really care. Yeah, it looks like more Metroid to me, which I'm not that interested in. Like, give me a full, proper FPS Metroid Prime, and maybe I'll jump back in. But I just don't like side-scrollers that much, if I'm going to be entirely honest. And I think when it comes to games sort of in the vein of a Metroidvania, roguelikes really kind of have taken the crown for me in that arena, because in a lot of respects, roguelikes kind of are like Metroidvanias, where you're slowly exploring some sort of large environment and finding upgrades that are make you stronger over time. And a lot of roguelikes these days are even leaning into those sort of Metroidvania elements of, heavily emphasizing exploring the environment that you're in for secrets and upgrades and different passages to different locations, and utilizing specific secret switches to activate different paths through levels that can allow you to unlock more content. In a very Metroidvania-y way. Now, obviously, there is one important difference between a Metroidvania and a roguelike, and that is that roguelikes typically don't allow you to backtrack or go back to previous areas you've explored with new upgrades, which is sort of a key component of a Metroidvania, going back to areas you've already explored and finding new things there. That sort of rediscovery in an area that you thought you've already seen the entirety of is a lot of the enjoyment of a Metroidvania. But I kind of don't care. I think roguelikes are more entertaining in their gameplay. The way that they force you to actually, get good at the games, for lack of a better term, is a lot more compelling to me than just sort of meandering your way through the environments in the way that you do in Metroidvania games. Yeah. I think I've kind of lost interest in the genre as a whole, and Metroid in particular really doesn't appeal to me either. I feel like I've been there and I've done that, and I don't often feel that a Metroid game brings much new to the table anymore, and that's why I haven't played this. I don't really want to, if I'm entirely honest. Metroid Dread, is a game where you can curl up into a ball, like a pill bug. That's what it gets the award for the Pillbug Award for being able to curl up into a ball. Congratulations, Metroid Dread. That brings me to the game I most should have played this year, but didn't. It's Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm a weirdo who likes Guardians of the Galaxy 2 more than the first one. I think it's a pretty great little piece of like family drama. It's really good, and I like that a lot. But I don't know that I necessarily care broadly about the Guardians of the Galaxy per se as a franchise. Like, it's fine. I don't really have a lot of interest in comics. Comics are a medium to me that I just cannot get into. I look at them and I just see when I'm reading a book, I can put myself into the book, right? Or even when I'm watching a movie or playing a game, I can feel immersed in those medias. But when I'm reading a comic, I feel like I'm in a room reading a comic. It just doesn't grab me at all. There's something about, I think, the just wrong cocktail of the images being handed to you, so you don't really have to picture yourself in the space. You kind of get to see it, and just reading out what happens, it doesn't do anything for me. And I know that's a weird tangent, but here we are. Guardians of the Galaxy, it's it looks fine. It kind of looks like, Guardians of the Galaxy shenanigans. I think a lot of the times we can detach franchises from the people that make them and make them interesting, and I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't necessarily say that I really love Guardians of the Galaxy nearly as much as I really like the work Guardians of the Galaxy and Guardians of the Galaxy 2, the films. Like, I like those films a lot, but whenever I see other Guardians of the Galaxy stuff, it just doesn't do anything for me. That being said, this looks okay. It's definitely the game that's probably the closest to something I would like, even though it looks kind of like a generic action-y game, which isn't really my thing. It looks like it might be interesting. I probably should have played it. I don't really have an excuse for this one, except the sort of rambly nonsense that I already said. So Guardians of the Galaxy wins the coveted award of game I actually probably should have played this year, and probably still eventually will. Which I don't think I will for any of the rest of the games on this list. And that brings me to the meh-iest game of 2021, and if you watch the rest of my videos, which, I don't know that anyone does, you might already have an idea of what this is. It's Psychonauts 2. I talked pretty well at length about the complicated reasons why I just don't think Psychonauts 2 is very good. I think it ultimately really fails to capture the charm of the first game. It's a little too self-serious in a way that makes the self-seriousness not hit particularly well, but also it makes the comedy not hit very well either, what could be vaguely construed as comedy. Anyways, it just... nothing in Psychonauts 2 really works for me, and even the platforming feels more generic. It feels more like a design by committee, focus-tested, this is what good platforming is kind of deal, as opposed to being any sort of more unique or singular vision. The fact that it's not a platforming adventure game anymore, I think, takes a lot away from the uniqueness that made Psychonauts 1 so memorable. The level design just isn't on par or, again, as interesting as the first Psychonauts, and I think even when not taken in relationship to its former incarnation, Psychonauts 2 is just very okay. The writing isn't exemplary. There are a couple parts that I like. Like I said in my review, I really like basically every part that has to do with Raz's family. I think that was great. but that they are shoved too far to the side, and the game just kind of wants to get on with the other things it wants to get on with, and those don't land nearly as well. Compton's level, I think, is also pretty great, but man, a lot of the rest of it is real mediocre. Yeah, the platforming is just kind of boring, the level design's boring, the writing isn't great. It feels like a rehash of Psychonauts 1 a lot, but worse in almost every respect. It's a lot less creative and wild than the first one was, where the first one felt charged with so much. I know I'm comparing it to the first one again, so sue me. The first one was charged with these wild and wacky and zany ideas. The second one is, the most mundane possible ways I could think to express someone's mind to someone else, and that's kind of disappointing. And really, if there's a reason that it's my meh-iest game of 2021, it's the most disappointing to me personally, and I know that that's not necessarily a popular opinion. Suck it. I don't like it. I don't like Psychonauts 2. And much like The World Ends With You 2, Psychonauts didn't really need a sequel. I know that Psychonauts 1 ends with a sequel hook, obviously. But technically, we've already seen that wrapped up, so whatever. Psychonauts 2 really is indicative of what Double Fine became after Psychonauts, which is just kind of directionless and uninteresting and not very good. I don't think they have made a good game since Psychonauts, and they technically weren't Double Fine when they made Psychonauts, so I don't think Double Fine has ever made a good game, quite frankly. Yeah. Weird to say, but it's true. So what award does Psychonauts 2 get? It gets, the biggest, baby that fell onto the floor and grew a second head, but the second head didn't work good, and so it made the whole thing bad. Yeah, it gets a Dented Baby Head Award for 2021. You're welcome, Psychonauts 2. And that brings me to what is probably the only really actually good game, which also happened to actually come out in 2021. And that is Inscription. Now, this is I believe it's third official release by Daniel Mullins. And boy, is that guy just on fire. He can't make a bad game, I don't think. It doesn't seem possible yet. Anyways, Pony Island and The Hex are excellent. And while each of them, I'm gonna have to talk a little bit about what Inscription does. So here's your warning. Go play Inscription first. It's the best game that came out this year, bar none. Just go play it if you haven't already, because you can't talk about the game without spoiling it. You can't. Not if you want to say anything meaningful. So go play it. It's not a joke. Go play Inscription. So yeah, welcome back from playing Inscription. I'm sure you enjoyed it. If you didn't, well, you're wrong. So here's the thing about Inscription, right? Each Daniel Mullins game has been subversive, so it's not surprising when Inscription is also subversive. The subversiveness doesn't exist in Daniel Mullins' game as a gotcha, as a plot twist at this point. It just is what they are, and it uses that subversion of being something other than what it appears to be very commentative and reflective of the genres and pieces that each of the games looks to critique at least a little bit. And each of them, with those subversions, tells an entirely different meta-narrative or story as well. And Inscription is easily the best game that Daniel Mullins has made as well. As a roguelike card builder, at least the first chapter, of Inscription being a roguelike card builder is easily on par, or if not in many respects better than a lot of other roguelike card builders, or deck builders, sorry. It's spectacular in that regard. It's technically not a deck builder. Deck builder is a different thing in card game lingo. I know that, but it's easy. Most people don't really know the difference. It doesn't matter. My point is, right, the way that you build your deck and upgrade your cards, and the way that it deals with progression over time by both unlocking new mechanics and allowing you to create a new super overpowered card to go into the pool of cards each time that you fail, is spectacular. Like, I love how that works. And there are an infinite amount of secrets hidden throughout the game. And of course, for those who don't know, Inscription also did actually have an ARG attached to it. You can go read or look up exactly what happened with that. The previous two games, Pony Island and the Hex, also had ARGs. And I do love that. I love that it has elements that literally go outside of the game. And while I personally don't take part in those and, am more interested in looking at them once they're done, I still love to read about them. They're still very interesting to experience sort of secondhand. And Inscriptions is really fun and interesting the way that it plays with not only the lore that it itself has, but the lore, especially that the Hex established about various companies and people within its world. And that's only talking about the first part of Inscription as well. There is so much more once you get to the second act, the I think it's called like the Game Boy Advance act, which is appropriate. It's so much fun being able to mix and match all of the different strategies from the different card tribes together to form these unique little decks. It's probably the least interesting part of the game because it's relatively easy and it doesn't have any sort of the roguelike elements that make the first part so much fun, but it is a little bit it is interesting to have a little bit more freedom to enjoy and a little bit more ability to go around and explore the environments looking for secrets, of which there are, again, a lot. And there are so many small minutiae to the card interactions and interactions with the various NPCs you'll encounter that it's just a wonderful time. And then you get to the third act, and I feel that the third act is a lot better than the second. Still not quite on par with the first, but I love how it borrows a different set of mechanics, kind of borrowing a sort of Dark Souls set of mechanics and allowing you to go back to various checkpoints after you've died. And man, it's just so good. And the third act, of course, has expands upon the lore the most. And the fact that each of these acts is sort of bookended by being able to watch this journey of a dude finding Inscription, like literally finding Inscription, and sort of going on his own weird little journey that is difficult to make sense of without looking at the ARG. Man, it's just a ton of fun on every conceivable level. The story that the game tells is great. The gameplay itself is spectacular, and the sort of meta-narrative journey that there is to go on with Inscription as you explore its various elements that expand the game beyond the bounds of a program. It just makes it really is a magical time, and the best game to come out this year, easily. I don't really even think that anything else is close, quite frankly. Disco Elysium would be, but it didn't come out this year, technically. Well, it did technically come out this year, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. So yeah, that's it. Inscription is amazing. If I had one real complaint, it's that we don't get to explore a world controlled by each of the different sages. It's painful almost at the end of the game where it teases you what that would have looked like, especially the last one where you're basically playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, damn, I want that game. Like, I want that game so bad. It's so good, and I do love that as well. The way that each of the game styles is essentially taken from an actual card game. Like I said, especially the last one is very clear on its Yu-Gi-Oh-esque influence, and it's just so good. So yeah, that's me rambling about, stuff that was good this year. There wasn't a lot. There wasn't a lot this year that was very good in the world of video games. That's why there are 12 entries on this list. Because I don't know, 12. That's what I liked or didn't like this year in my arbitrary list of awards that is very lazy of things that happened to come out this year. I know that's not the same thing that I said the first time, but it wouldn't be very lazy if I said the correct title, would it? No, it wouldn't. With YouTube-friendly quote-unquote world events, it's game development sure has been slow, and really development on everything, which, that's fine. It's fine. I think everyone has been stressed for these last 2 years, and honestly, looking back through 2021, it's hard to differentiate the things that happened this year from last year because it was all just such a blur. But I personally love these kind of year in review things. I know it's sort of fluffy and a little pointless, which is why it's whatever. It's whatever. But I like it. I like talking about stuff that happened this year. And on my non-gaming related things that happened this year, the best thing that happened this year was probably Evangelion 4.0 or 3.0 plus 1.0, whatever the hell it is called. That was easily the best piece of media, piece of entertainment, transcendent spiritual experience, whatever, to happen this year. That was truly amazing. It wrapped up that entire rebuild of Evangelion series in a way that made it worth existing, because I think for a long time it just didn't really feel like the rebuilds, especially when only 1 and 2 were out, it didn't really feel like the rebuilds of Evangelion were much of anything. I remember thinking that I didn't much care for them back at the time in only 1 and 2, and even when 3 was out, because 3 is so difficult to interpret without 4. I say that, but like watching it again before 4 came out, I had a pretty good idea or understanding of what 4 was going to be about generally, and I was right. Which is to say, it was sort of about letting go of things that are important to you, specifically in the context of Evangelion, letting go of Evangelion. And that's a lot about what the rebuilds ended up being about, and it's not only relatable on like this wide scale, but it's relatable on a personal level as well, that I thought just made the rebuilds spectacular. So there you go. There's the bonus entry on the list. Watch not mechs technically fight each other in weird spaces and fight weird skeleton head things, and have the best time I've had all year, basically. Yeah. So that's it. That's the year in review. That's 2021. I would say I hope the next year's going to be better, but at this point, who the hell knows? Whatever. I hope you're doing great. I hope you had a great 2021. How was your 2021? Was it good? Mine was pretty good, if I'm going to be entirely honest. Like, I had a pretty great time. I also played through the Resident Evil remake, the first one, this year, and scraped my keyboard. Great. And that was great. That was probably one of my favorite games that I've played this year, but it's not here because I really thought about trying to put it on, but, man, that did not come out this year. Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit did that come out this year. So here's special entry number 2, Resident Evil Remake. That's really good, turns out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go play that maybe if you're looking for some more Resident Evil things after Resident Evil 8. That's kind of what I did. I was like, man, I played through Resident Evil 7 for the video again, and I played through Resident Evil Remake. And it took me a while, and there are a lot of aspects about Resident Evil Remake that I might talk about one day, because it's interesting how both timeless and incredibly dated that game is. Yeah, boy. I've been rambling here for quite a while now, but it's my video and I can ramble if I want. No one can stop me. I know that joke gets made a lot, but it does feel pretty empowering, actually, that I can just continue to talk. And you can turn off the video if you like, but you can't stop me from having recorded this in the first place. It feels good. It feels good. So, yeah, is there anything else I want to talk about that happened this year? Not really. I mean, I got even harder into Gunpla. You know, that's a thing. I probably should stop. I've probably spent way too much money on that, but I don't know. I don't care. It's a lot of fun to put them together and do painting and stuff. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that either. Kind of like League, it ends up eating a lot of your money, mostly. Not like League so much. League eats your time and soul and heart and mind. Gunpla is good for your heart and soul and expression and helping you to think more logically, but it is very bad for your wallet. So I guess it's not really very much like League when I think about it. So yeah, tiny Gundam models. If you want to have a good relaxing time and have more money than you should, which I don't think anyone really does. Well, some people do. I'm not going to get into that. That's a Disco Elysium talk. We're not going to talk about that right now. Actually, it's probably going to be a Nier Automata talk. I'm going to talk about that in Nier Automata. Probably. That's still going. It's like the second video I've talking about that, and boy, is that still hard to write for. I need to watch more on Nietzsche. Yeah, I don't know a lot about Nietzsche, honestly. I should. It seems like a thing one should know about, but yeah. Now I actually am just rambling. So I think it's a good time to end it. Thank you to all of the games that got awards this year, even the ones that weren't good. It was fun to give you awards, and especially the ones that were bad. It was probably more fun to give you awards than it was to play you, especially Psychonauts 2, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's it. If you like this video, you probably haven't listened to this far, but if you have, do the likey, subscribey, thumbs uppy, and belly thingy so that I get numbers. Numbers good. Numbers me. Numbers please. Yeah. Numbers good. Goodbye. Goodbye. Please numbers. Thank you. Goodbye.